Welcome to Excel Basics number 8. And in this video, we get to talk about Excel data analysis. We get to study pivot tables. Yes, the pivot table, the most used data analysis tool in the world. We'll also study Excel tables, amazing slicers, charts, and conditional formatting. Now on the sheet topics, here's what we're going to study. We have to define what data analysis is. What is data? What is information? Then we'll talk about the Excel table feature to dynamically store data. We'll talk about pivot tables to create reports. And we're going to see the new pivot table number formatting option. That's actually an insert into this video because it's a brand new feature. Then we'll talk about slicers to filter reports, charts to visualize data, conditional formatting to highlight the important data. And then in next video, we'll get to see not the pivot table feature, but the brand new pivot by and group by functions. All right, let's go over to the sheet data analysis. Now on this sheet here, we have the definition of data analysis. And it's quite simple. Convert raw data into useful information to gain insight and help make decisions. Now, you might hear the synonyms data analytics, business intelligence, but it's all just data analysis. And the goal of data analysis is to help make data-driven decisions which tend to be more accurate and help to achieve goals more consistently. Here's two examples. We have sales data in a table. This is a table. Field names or column headers at the top, date, sales rep, sales. And each row or record represents a sales transaction. We're going to take that table of data and convert it into a monthly sales rep sales report. We're going to ask the question, what are the top 3 sales amounts? Now, actually, the question before we start dealing with the raw data is if a bonus is given for the 3 biggest monthly sales amounts, who gets the bonus? We're going to take this raw data, create this pivot table report with sales rep and month, and then the total for each month and sales rep, and then add conditional formatting to show the 3 biggest. Not only that, but when we add data later to the table, we'll just refresh and we'll see the latest 3 biggest values. So from the raw data into useful information to make decisions, we know our answer. Chantel, Joe, and Tyrone. Now our second example, we have sales data in a table, and we need to convert it into a monthly sales trends chart. The question is, what were the sales trends over the last 6 months? We take our table of raw data using a pivot table and a pivot chart. We create our monthly sales trend chart. So it looks like up, a little bit down, way up, a little bit down, and then way up. So overall, the trend seems to be up. Now, we'll do both of these examples in just a moment, but we want to define a few other terms. Let's scroll down. Now, raw data is defined as data stored in its smallest form in a cell. This is not raw data. All this data is stored together. It's really hard to access that number to add, access the sales rep name to use as a condition for adding, or the date to figure out which month it is. Here's raw data. Column header, or what's called a field name at the top, date, person, sales. And then in separate cells, there's the date. That's the person who made the sale, and that's the amount. Now a proper data set, that's this, known as a data set, there it is, or just table. That's a table. A table is made up of fields. That's a column in a table. Column 1, 2, 3. But we don't call them column 1, 2, 3. We have field names. This is really important because it tells you what data to put into this column. And later when we're accessing data in this table, we say, hey, I want to look at the date field. So these are called fields, sometimes also called column headers or headers. And then a record, that's each row in the table. Each row in this case represents a sales transaction. Now, table requirements when you have a table in the Excel worksheet. Well, field names must be in the first row. So here's the first row. Records of related data are in subsequent rows. And when you have a table in the Excel worksheet, as opposed to later we'll have tables in the data model or Power Query, when the table is in the Excel worksheet, you have to have empty cells all the way around. You cannot put a little note next to a table because it becomes part of the table, and the tools we use for data analysis and tables do not work. Now, I have empty cells all the way around. If you were to delete this column, that's fine too because it's touching the row headers. The table can also be touching the column headers. Now I'm going to Control Z. This is also an example of a table, a single column of survey data. But there it is. Field names in the first row. Records, in this case responses, in subsequent rows. And we have empty cells all the way around. Now we want to click on the sheet DA Tools. Now here's a list of some of the data analysis tools in Excel. And throughout the class, we'll learn about all of these tools. In this video, though, we will see the Excel table features: sort, filter, pivot table to make reports, Excel charts to visualize, and conditional formatting to visualize. Now, all of these notes on this sheet are also in our PDF notes. Now we want to try our data analysis examples. And before we go to DA example, let's go look at the answer. Our goal is to go from this data set into this summary report, add conditional formatting, and then make a second pivot table with a sales trend chart. Now let's go over to DA example. We are given a proper data set with date, sales rep, and sales. But because we want to be able to add records to the bottom of the table later and have our reports and charts update, we want to first convert the proper data set into an Excel table. The way you do this is you make sure that you have a proper data set, field names in the first row, records in subsequent rows, and then you click in a single cell. Don't highlight some, just one cell. Go up to Insert, and then click on Table. Now notice the screen tip tells us the keyboard, Control-T. And because the Excel table feature is so handy, we're always going to use the keyboard, Control-T. The Create Table dialog box pops up. Because we have field names at the top and it has some formatting to distinguish it from the data below, it knows that we have what they call headers checked. Now when we click OK, it adds formatting for us. It also adds sorting and filtering drop-downs, which we're not going to use in this video. And the most important thing is if we add a new column or new rows to the bottom of the table, all of that new data will be recognized by any report or charts or other things like formulas that are pointing to the table. Now, as soon as you Control-T to a table, you want to go up to Table Design, Properties, and name your table. Now, we're going to call this F Sales. The F is because these are the type of facts that we're going to summarize. And the table is about sales, so we called it Sales. Tab. Now, if I click off to the side, up in the name box where defined names or table names can appear, there it is. If I click on F Sales, it jumps and highlights the inside part of the table. Now we want to go back over here to the answer sheet. And the goal is somehow to get a unique list of sales rep names from this column here, and then take these transactional daily dates and roll them up into months. And then from the sales column, sum based on two conditions. So in this cell right here, the pivot table is not adding everything from this column. It's only adding records where it finds the sales rep name Chantel. So there's Chantel, Chantel, Chantel. And the month is February. Now this table happens to be sorted, so it's not till we get down to there's a record that has two conditions. The month is February in the date column, and the sales rep is Chantel in the sales rep column. That means it will get this number and then these two conditions are met, so get this number. It'll get all the numbers that match and sum them. So really, when we use the pivot table feature based on a proper data set, what we're really doing is making some calculation based on conditions and criteria. In this case, we have two conditions. In order for the record to be included, the sales rep has to be Chantel, and the month has to be February. All right, so let's go back over to DA example. All right, to create our pivot table, we're going to take this proper data set, in our case, an Excel table, select a single cell, go up to the Insert tab, Tables Group, Pivot Table dropdown, and click From Table Range. Now I want to click Escape because I got to teach you the keyboard. We're going to make a lot of pivot tables in this class, and of course, keyboards are fast. We hit the Alt key. We see N for Insert, so I tap N. I see V for Pivot Table dropdown, so I tap V. I see T for our From Table Range, so I tap T. Now I'm going to click Escape. Even though this seems like a long keyboard, it is fast. Alt NVT. That opens the Pivot Table from Table or Range dialog box. Now notice there's the name of the table, so it will always get all the new data from the table. Now we want to choose where this goes. I don't want it on a new worksheet. So we select Existing Worksheet for location. Let's click the title bar and drag, because I want to put this in F6. So I select F6. I see it there. Now I click OK. And over on the right is our Pivot Table Fields task pane in the top. This is a field list. 1, 2, 3. Those are the fields from our original table. We get to drag these fields down as conditions to columns, filters, and rows. And we get to drag fields like sales down to values to make our calculations. Now looking at our finished report, what are we going to need in the rows? We need a unique list of sales reps, but we also, for each row under sales rep, need a unique list of months. Well, the pivot table feature makes creating these types of unique lists easy. There's sales rep, there's rows, so all I have to do is click on the field and drag it down to rows. When I drop it, instantly I get a unique list. Now I want to uncheck this just for a moment. We'll add it back later. And I want to show you what happens if I drag date down to rows. When I drop it, instantly it creates a unique list of months. And if there were more than one year, it would create a unique list of years also. Now up here I can see there's actually two new fields added to the table. Now they don't appear here, because anytime you use the pivot table feature, it actually takes all of the data and stores it in a behind-the-scenes location called a pivot table cache. Now we can't go look at that pivot table cache, but in that data set, it memorized this new column, months. Now we don't want days or date, and there's our unique list of months. Now we want a unique list of months for each sales rep. So I'm going to click and drag, and very carefully. By the way, notice the no, no, no symbol. You can't drop it. You can drop it to columns, filters, or rows to add conditions. Now notice there's an icon. That blue means column. That blue means filter. That blue means row. And that blue means values. Now we want to drag this above. That's not above. The green line, when I drag it above, that tells me when I drop it, now that's on top. And for each one of these conditions, there's a unique list of months. Now your pivot table might not show the field names, and that's not a good thing. To manually change your pivot table, you go up to Design, over to Layout, Report Layout, and Show in Tabular. You can also use Outline Form. Both of these will list the field names. So you should select Tabular Form. Now I have my default set on Tabular Form, so I got to show you how to change that, because we almost always want field names listed in our report. We go up to File, down to Options, This opens up Excel options. We click on Data on the left, then Edit Default Layout. And you want to check this drop down for Report Layout to Tabular. You can try Outline and Tabular if you like one better. Either one is fine because they show the field names. Select Tabular and then click OK. Now, every time you create a pivot table, you'll see those field names. Now, in this case, this field says month's date. I don't really want that. So you're also allowed to type a new report column header name as long as it's not one of the field names that already exists in the table. So I'm just going to type months and enter. Now we have the conditions for our calculations in the rows. So the next step is to drag our sales field down to values. Now this is a number field, meaning it has numbers in it. So when I drop it, it defaults to sum. Just to show you how powerful a pivot table is, let's uncheck sales. And if we drag sales rep down to values, this is a text field, so it defaults to count. Now, I don't want sales rep down there, so we can click the drop down and say remove field. Or from the old days, you can just click and drag anywhere, and it's removed from the report. Now let's drag sales down to values, and there's our conditional calculations. Sure enough, it got exactly the correct total. It went through this entire data set, and only when the record said Chantel and February did it take that number. So it did that for each one of these. It also has a subtotal. That meant it found all of the records that had Chantel. Now, count and sum are not the only calculations you can make here. Now, 2 videos ahead, we'll see all sorts of amazing calculations. But just as a preview, if you right-click in the values area, there's 2 places to make calculations. Summarize values by, that has aggregate calculations. Those are calculations that take a bunch of items and deliver a single answer, like summing, when you take a bunch of numbers and you deliver one answer. Or averaging, take a bunch of numbers, deliver one answer. Here, for show values as, they can do things like calculate the percent of column total or percent of grand total. Now, we'll see those calculations 2 videos ahead. I clicked Escape. Now, in a pivot table, we want to add number formatting. Now, if we had calculations with formulas in the cells, we'd have to highlight all the cells that we want to apply the formatting and Control 1. But in a pivot table, it's easier. We can select any one cell in the values area, right-click, and the option we want is number formatting. We don't want format cells because that opens the normal format cells dialog box with all 6 tabs. We want to right-click number formatting. Now, Microsoft made a mistake when they named this dialog box. It should say number formatting for values area of pivot table, but they called it format cells. Now, you can tell this is the one for the pivot table because there's only one tab. And the beauty of this is when I select, and I have a $sign at the top, so I'm not going to select currency. I'm going to select number. There's my preview. Check use a comma. And when we apply this number formatting, it's to the actual field. So all of the cells, including the subtotals and grand total, will get the number formatting. When I click OK, that is an amazing report. Now, the video you're watching, I filmed before this amazing new feature came out that I'm about to show you. Now, there's no number formatting on this table. I'm going to click in the top cell, Control-Shift-Down arrow. You can see that highlights all the way to the bottom. Then we use the keyboard Control-1. These are cells, so we use format cells. I'm going to use currency, click OK. What this means is now this column has number formatting. What you just saw and what you'll see throughout the rest of the video has been how pivot tables work since the beginning. They do not see number formatting from the source table. But watch this. I'm going to click in whatever cell in this table, Alt-NVT. Let's say existing right here. Click OK. I'm going to make a simple pivot table. Sales rep down to rows. Instantly we get a unique list. Sales down to values. And what? Number formatting appears. Now, this is not in all versions yet. It's still in beta. But I had to show you because some of you who have Microsoft 365 Excel either already have this or will get this soon. Now, sometimes you don't want the number formatting. Then, as we saw earlier and later in this video, you got to use not format cells, but number formatting. Then, for example, maybe you do not want the $sign. I'm going to say none. Click OK. That's much less cluttered. And plus, I'm indicating the unit at the top. Now, this is on a new worksheet that I inserted. You won't see it as you watch the rest of the video, but when you download the file, you can try this out. Now, why is a pivot table called a pivot table? Because you can take any field. Let's say you created this report and your boss said, no, I wanted months across the columns, sales reps down the rows. Well, the pivot table feature makes it easy to pivot a row condition to a column condition. So we simply drag month over to columns, and instantly you have what is called a cross-tab report. Now, the column isn't wide enough, so it puts up that fence. We can click between J and K, click and drag. Now, it's called a cross-tabulated report because at any intersecting cell, it uses the column header condition and the row header condition for making the conditional calculation. So right here, those are the records that have a March date and sales rep Joe. That's the total for Chantel, and that's the grand total. That grand total right there is like adding the entire column. Now let's drag month down below sales rep. Man, that's amazing. Just pivoting our report. Now we want to use something called conditional formatting to highlight only the 3 biggest values. And if we add new data and refresh this report, I want the conditional formatting to automatically update. Now, just as with cells and a pivot table, cells you have to highlight all the cells before adding formatting. In the values area of a pivot table, you can just select one cell. Now we want to go up to Home, Styles, Conditional Formatting dropdown, and there's a bunch of great ways to add formatting. You could specify a certain hurdle, greater than, less than. Top bottom rules, that's what we want. Data bars, the tallest bar will be on the biggest number, the shortest bar on the smallest number. Color scales. This will color code your numbers from smallest to biggest. We'll learn about some of these visualization options later. For the time being, we want top 10. Well, let's click, and the dialog box allows us to set it at 3. I don't usually accept the default, so I click the drop-down and go down to Custom Format. When I click, there's 4 tabs that allow you to add some formatting. Let's do fill green, font, let's say white. Click OK. Click OK. Now, the funny thing is, it did not highlight the 3 biggest. But this little option only shows up in a pivot table. I can click the drop-down. The default is selected cells. We could include all the numbers, including the grand total. That's not what we want. Or all cells for months. So we select this one, and there's the top 3. 1921 and 19,000. Tyrone, Joe, and Chantel. Now, here's what's so amazing about combining a pivot table and an Excel table. If we scroll down, I included some more data down here. Now, to select this, we could click with our selection cursor, click and drag, or you can click in one cell, and we're going to use Control asterisk, either Control Shift 8 or Control asterisk on the number pad. That highlights everything in the current range. We're going to use Control C to copy. And because it's an Excel table, I click in the first cell below the table in the first column, not here, right here. And when I Control V, instantly those records are incorporated into the table object. Now, if your table does not automatically expand, then there's a setting in Options, so File, Options. And Microsoft put it in a terrible place. It's so hard to find for so many people. Proofing, autocorrect options, format as you type. And you have to check this, because if it didn't work, that was unchecked. Include new rows and columns in table. By the way, this information is in the PDF notes also. Now, the new table object contains all the data. But when we scroll up, why didn't the pivot table instantly update? Now, formulas would instantly update. And later in the class, we'll see how to create reports like this with formulas. But here's the reason it didn't update. Remember, when you create a pivot table, it takes whatever the data is and stores it in the pivot table cache. So no problem. All we have to do to refresh the pivot table cache is right-click anywhere in the pivot table and click Refresh. And just like that, now we have January to June totals for each sales rep and the conditional formatting updated. By the way, there's also in the Data Ribbon tab, Refresh and Refresh All option. Now from our data set, we want to create our sales trend chart. Now notice that the cursor is inside the pivot table somewhere, and that allows the pivot table field's task pane to show. When I click inside the table to create our second pivot table, it goes away for this pivot table. By the way, if you lose it and want it back, just click inside or right-click, and sometimes this will be unselected. All right, we click in a single cell, and we're going to use our keyboard to create our monthly sales pivot table. Alt-NVT, that's the correct table on the existing. We're going to put this in J6, click OK. Now, because this is looking at the same pivot cache, it remembers that there's a month column. So I'll drag month down to rows. I see my unique list. Sales down to values. Right-click, number formatting, number, comma, click OK. Select the column header and type months and enter. Now, from this pivot table, we can create a chart. Insert, over to Charts. And when we want to see trends, the perfect chart is a line chart. So I'll click the drop down. And the first one is fine, so I will click. We can move the chart with our move cursor. Be sure not to click inside, because if you use your move cursor inside of here, it'll move internally pieces you may not want. So click the outside edge. And by the way, we can move it and snap to grid if we hold the Alt key. So I'm holding Alt and moving it. It snapped perfectly to the grid. I can also resize it. Click, hold Alt, and snap to grid. Now, the most important rule for creating charts and for visualizing data, and this rule was created by the famous visualizing expert Edward Tufte, and he said, no chart junk. And that means you must remove all elements in the chart that do not help to deliver the message. Now, for us, the message we want to deliver is, what's the trend? So certainly, that chart element is definitely helping to deliver the message. But look at this. That's a chart title that says the word total. That doesn't help deliver the message at all. Now, to change the chart title, you can click twice. And when you see the dotted line, you can highlight and type a new title. But if you click on the outside edge and see the solid line, you can link this to the cells. So I see the solid line, and now I type an equal sign. That shoots me up to the formula bar. I click on cell K2. I can see the formula up in the formula bar. And when I hit Enter, now it's linked to the cell. If I want to edit, I can simply edit. And this is following Excel's golden rule, of course. And when I hit Enter, that updates. I'm going to Control Z. So for the rest of the elements, we look at them and we ask the question, is this helping to deliver the message? Now, a legend like this, when there's only one element, is doing nothing to help deliver the message. So I'm going to click on that and use the delete key. Also, this green plus allows you to add and remove items by using the checklist. We could have removed that legend right here. Now, one element that's not in this list right here are these field buttons. Now, it does allow you to filter, but remember, we have a pivot table. So we can filter it here, and that's automatically reflected in the chart. So really, these are visually not contributing anything. Now, we can remove these by selecting them and using right-click, hide all field buttons on chart. Also, if we have it selected, we can go up to the context-sensitive ribbons. These 3 tabs are just for the chart. Click on Pivot Table Analyze, and there's a drop-down for field buttons, hide all. By the way, when I select this chart, there's 3 tabs in the ribbon. If I click inside the pivot table, there's 2 specialized pivot table tabs in the ribbon. Now back to the chart. Let's select the grid lines. Now, if we're going to leave these numbers here, these grid lines might be helpful to help line up whatever the numbers are. But if we delete them, that looks a little bit less cluttered. Again, sometimes you want the lines, sometimes you don't. Now let's come up to this green plus, and I want to add data labels. Now, this is helpful if you want to see the trend and the exact numbers. But notice how it does add a little clutter. If you don't want clutter, then you leave these. So you can choose between these 2. I'm going to leave the data label so I see the trend and the exact numbers. Let's select the axis, and I'm going to use the delete key. Now, some of the numbers are sort of in the way, and these data labels are actually grouped together. If you click once, they're all selected, and you can format from the Home ribbon tab or go over to the Format Chart ribbon tab. But if you select the data label a second time, then just that data label is selected, and you can format, or in our case, I want to move it. I'm going to point to the edge and use my Move cursor. Let me click it a little bit further. We can see that line. Let's do it for this one also. For the 2 down trends, I'm going to have those below, and then the uptrends above. So that is looking pretty good. As we look at each element in our chart, it looks like all the elements are working together to give us the overall impression that, yes, the trend is up. There's 2 slight downs, but overall, the trend is up. So the chart is finished. But wouldn't it be cool to have a chart that could show us the trends for each sales rep? Well, let's click back in the pivot table. The only condition we have in the pivot table is months. And that means this is for January, February, March, and so on. But what if I wanted all of these monthly totals just for Chantel or just for Jim? To do that, we come over to our field list, and we want to drag sales rep down to filters. Filters adds a row right above the report that says all, because these are the sales for everyone. But from the drop-down, I can select Chantel, click OK, and that is amazing. Now, from a calculating point of view, that cell right there is showing the total for the month of January and Chantel. Here, it's for February and Chantel. So a filter affects every single calculation in the pivot table, whereas when you drag a field down to rows or columns, it does it for each individual row, or in our cross tab for each individual column. Now, instead of adding a filter above, there's a much better way. I'm going to click and drag this off. With the pivot table selected, we come up to Pivot Table Analyze, and there's a filter group. And here's a visual filter called a slicer. So I'm going to click Insert Slicer. Check Sales Rep, click OK, click on Title Bar and drag. We can resize. We can also, with our context-sensitive ribbon tab for Slicer, we can have multiple columns. We could add formatting and other ways to change this. But watch this. It's going to affect the pivot table, and of course, by default, because the chart is connected to the pivot table, the chart. There's Chantel's trend, Jim, Joe, and Tyrone. And then, if I want to see it all, I click the red X. So what we have going on here in terms of data analysis is we have an Excel table, which gives us a dynamic data source. We have two pivot table reports that allow us to make calculations with conditions and criteria. We have a visualization, which gives us a quick impression, or in this case, a much easier way to see the trend than with the actual numbers. And we have a slicer that allows us to filter a pivot table or a chart. Okay, now I want you to look at the end. Homework. There's one practice problem, and I gave you the solution. Don't click on the solution until you completed it here, but there it is. There's the solution. All right, we'll see you next video for the amazing new functions, pivot by and group by.